everyone, and welcome to our session here in the Buildings and Cooling Pavilion, all about solutions for the front lines and how we're rebuilding our future against the impacts of climate change that are being felt very real here already today. My name is Victoria Burrows. I look after strategic partnerships and insights at Kompas VC. My colleague Andreas is on the panel, so you'll hear about what Kompas VC is all about in a moment. And I'll introduce the panel in a second, but I want to start by saying that climate risk is no longer only outside of our buildings, as we can feel in this moment right now. They're inside them. Floods enter homes, wildfire smoke enters our lungs, and classrooms have unsafe air. People are overheating in apartments that were designed for a cooler time. These stresses put our built environment, our health, and our livelihoods at risk. In terms of flooding, 1.8 billion people will face flooding by 2050, and global flood losses could triple by then. And for wildfires, 2 billion people were exposed by wildfire smoke in 2023, and the prevalence and locations are increasing in severity. And extreme heat already kills more people annually than all other climate hazards combined. I don't know if you guys knew that stat, but that blew me away. Absolutely wild. And then for air quality, which we'll also touch on today, 90% of the world's children breathe toxic air daily, and schools in highly polluted cities all often measure CO2 levels at 3 to 4 times healthy levels, which is just completely unacceptable in this day. So here's the good news. We've never had more tools and more options at our disposal, from bamboo blinds to AI microclimate engines to protect people and the buildings that they occupy. The challenge that we're here to talk about today is deployment, scale, and equity. So we're going to talk through 2 scenarios through the lens of design, data, and investment. Flooding and wildfire risk, secondly, overheating and retrofitting, and then finally, air quality in schools. And we're going to discuss what works, what scales, what's missing, and what policy and investment models do we need to scale. So I'm going to start by introducing our panelists and ask you to introduce yourselves. Let us know what lens you're looking at this question today, starting with you, Illya, please. Azaroff.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Illya Azaroff. I'm an architect, and I'm the incoming president of the American Institute of Architects. And we represent 105,000 architects in over 120 countries. So the lens I'm bringing this to you is I'm one of the leading experts in adaptation and mitigation. I'm also a disaster responder. The work that my office does and many of my colleagues across the Institute really are focused on this work. It is the work that we must do and find a way forward to build health, safety, and welfare for our communities.
I'm Andreas, Winter-Extrau. I'm a partner at Kompas VC. We are $285 million venture capital fund investing in sustainability across the built environment, manufacturing, and supply chain, because we see all of those linked. And other than that, I'm an economist by training, so not an architect, but I can talk about sort of the wider implications of the topics that we're talking about today.
And I'm Gavin McCormick from WattTime, a member of the Climate Trace Coalition. We're 150 different NGOs and universities that use satellites and AI to measure emissions from space. And my particular expertise, I'm also an economist, so apologies for a 2 economist panel. I specialize in the easiest of all solutions. So what are the maximum impact per dollar or unit of effort solutions that we see in the data?
And excellent. And in terms of scaling and adoption, that's absolutely critical, isn't it? Okay, so we're going to start with scenario 1, please, team. Thank you. So we're going to start with looking at adaptation. Imagine a community hit repeatedly by floodwaters, or homes blanketed in wildfire smoke, families losing possessions, insurers pulling out, mold growing behind walls, or evacuation orders becoming annual rituals. This is not an isolated story. It's unfortunately becoming a global norm. Floods cause around $50 billion of losses annually, and that's expected to rise sharply. Wildfire smoke exposure has increased 60% in 10 years, and in some regions, insurance premiums are rising between 30 and 50% annually, pushing homes off the affordability cliff. So we're here to look at both low tech, like raised electrics, floor doors, nature-based, all sorts of different solutions, and high tech, like AI flood intelligence. And importantly, we want to focus on solutions that are born locally but can be applied globally. So let's take a first look at, thank you. We have a video from Hohonu, which is a smart flood monitoring system.
Hohonu provides actionable data and insights to protect communities from future flooding. In over 100 locations across 13 states, Hohonu has enabled adaptive and resilient communities to collect and publicly share over 1 million hours of water level data in flood-prone areas. Hohonu is typically a good fit for communities who believe water monitoring is important for climate change adaptation and resilience. Hohonu's process was designed with 3 pillars: adaptation and resilience consultation, installation best practices, and community data sharing. During consultation, we review where monitoring sites are appropriate according to your adaptation and resilience strategy. We then ship our sensors directly to you from our US-based manufacturer. Hohonu's sensors are solar-powered and cell-connected, small enough to be out of sight, and fit well on fixed land-based structures. Installation is about the same difficulty as assembling bedroom furniture and takes as little as a few minutes. Hohonu's proprietary tidecast model uses machine learning to predict tides up to 80% more accurately than standard tide predictions. With Hohonu's web and mobile apps, everyone in your community can view real-time data, tidecast forecasts, and more. At Hohonu, we're committed to making sense of our coastal future.
So I love that solution in particular because of how accessible it is. I love what they said about it being able to be put together like IKEA furniture. I think that's brilliant. And enabling the early warning systems and signals that are so desperately needed, and we'll come on to what that could mean in a moment. Now thinking about the fire and wildfire that I mentioned earlier, and the huge impacts that that has on our buildings, on our homes, on our communities, and on people's health. There's a couple of solutions here. For example, this is Vibrant Planet. They're a land they have a software tool that enables land management decision making with data and wildfire modeling that's completely state-of-the-art and AI enabled. And then on the right here is Rain. They actually have a sensor that they can be installed into existing military and civil autonomous aircraft with the intelligence to perceive, understand, and suppress wildfires, to be able to make sure that that fire suppression system is being targeted in the best possible way, to be able to limit the damage. And then I think we have one more video that can talk a little bit to some of the design measures that are being incorporated into some communities, such as the ones we've heard about this week at this pavilion. That should play. Oh. No? No? Interesting. Okay. Well, maybe we can talk about that in a moment. But this amazing video, maybe we'll be able to share the link around later, shows how homes can be developed to adapt with rising tides up and down, how they can even have some really low-tech measures such as plastic, what's the word I'm looking for? Like sort of essentially flotation devices, so that as the tides rise, so does the home, and also some of the stilt projects that we've heard about as well throughout this week. Okay, so unfortunately we can't view that video, but maybe we can get some insights from our panel here. So I'd like to pause here, and maybe we can start with this question, Illya. Are floating homes the future of flood-proof housing?
So there's a lot to say about all the things you put together, and we're here to dwell about solutions, right? We have to distinguish between the Band-Aid approach and major surgery. So the Band-Aid approach is, yes, I can elevate a house or have a house that can move up the tides and down with the tides. But if you look at what a whole community design is, we need to understand the services to those houses, especially emergency response, and to be able to respond in those manners also have to be supported. So yes, if you look purely at the house, could I elevate it? Could it rise with the tides? Yes. But if you look at comprehensive resilience, we need to look at the 7 community lifelines. So we've seen this, and we've actually done a lot of this type of work, but the question back to the governing bodies is, if there is emergency vehicle service maintained to this house during a flood condition, and if not, then we are missing the point about what comprehensive community resilience looks like. So it has to be a whole community approach. With some of the other elements that were shown, such as the early warning systems, that is for life safety. I love it. Health, safety, and welfare. So that early warning system, flooding is coming, and now it's telling you, you must leave. Life is saved, property is lost. So let's make a distinction there. Is that adaptation? No, it's an early warning system. How do you use the data to change zoning and development is the question that needs to come forward with that solution. Love the solution, but unless you have political will to change settlement patterns and all of the pieces, then it does the singular job of saving lives, but does not change living patterns nor build adaptation into the community holistically. So I think there's a lot to be said about all of these pieces, but when you think about it, the whole community design effort is the only way you get to complete adaptation. So I can start with that. Yeah, we do a lot of this kind of work, but I have to tell you, that question coming back to policymakers, should we be living in these zones? And if we can support all of the community lifelines, then yes. But if not, then you have a house that's stranded with people inside, and if they have any other shock or stress that they have to address, they're isolated. So we have to think about those things.
Sometimes there's requirements within regulation that asks you to design to a 1 in 1,000 year storm or a 1 in 100 year storm. Is that something that you're seeing change enough?
Very much so. So this is, well, it depends on where you are. I love that question because as architects, health, safety, and welfare, and this is something, the ethical charge that we hold, even if the community says you have to design to the 100-year event, we actually have to design to what the science tells us. So for the most part, it is incumbent upon us, it is our ethical charge to say, well, there's the 500-year storm, there's data for the 1,000-year storm, there's one, for wind, it's on the 1,700-year storm basis. When you're looking at wind design from the engineering standpoint, we have to design to that maximum, come back to our clients between what's required and what we know, and present the case scenario, the ROI, and the understanding of here's what is required, but here's what we recommend. And that is a hard conversation, but it's also very hard to get financed that way. You know, we have to do the ROI.
It's got to be pretty strong, right? It's got to be super compelling to encourage people to make decisions that aren't mandated. It's something that's ultimately a choice.
It depends on if they've gone through a disaster before.
Yeah.
We've had so many people come to us noting that they want the highest degrees of resilience that they can afford, and that has been the conversation that changes. To your point, when you started, remember, last year alone, 120 million people were displaced globally from these shocks and stresses. By 2050, that's 220 million on an annual basis, unless we adopt much of what we're talking about here today, solutions for adaptability and resilience to shocks and stresses.
Yeah, thank you. Andreas, which of these is fundable?
Ooh, interesting. So fundamentally, all of them are fundable. The question is basically sort of how much money are you willing to pour into this? Who's pouring the money into it? And what is your return? I mean, the last one is definitely sort of more on the impact side. The other two are absolutely solutions that are fundable, they are scalable, they can be rolled out. You have usually sort of a public payer. Okay, GovTech takes a little bit longer usually to pay back, but generally they are attractive. I want to come back to the 100-year events because I don't know, we at least in Germany, I think we every 2 years we have now a 100-year flood. So it's becoming more and more frequent, and taking away from venture and going more into sort of the overall, and now the Economist is coming out, sort of insurance and governments actually have to step up here. So when we see Florida, where homes are not being insured anymore, the government stepping in because that is popular. Getting people sort of out of their houses is deeply unpopular, but fundamentally houses are then being rebuilt in areas where they shouldn't be rebuilt. So instead of taking the subsidies for the insurance, we need to talk about what adaptation actually means, and that is vacating flood zones. Last year we talked to a startup that was actually sort of pricing insurance differently. So they looked at more models, and then they incentivized homeowners to do upgrades on their homes to make them more hurricane and flood proof, and reduce sort of then specifically through these actions then insurance premiums, because they saw 50% lower or 70% lower claims. So, and that's what we need to do. We can't rebuild the same thing that built before and expect sort of the government or the public to step in and say, well, yeah, this is tough luck, because that's not our future.
And that's what we're here to talk about, right? The tools that enable that decision making to make some of those scenarios a lot more real. This is the choices you're making, and these are the sort of outcomes you might expect. So, Gavin, can you please share with us around those climate risk modeling innovations that you're seeing, and what's getting you excited about this space?
I think the main thing I would say is I would agree with Ilya's earlier comment is that what are you going to use the data for? And so I really like the way that you just characterized it as the purpose of data is to compare two scenarios where you're going to either take this action or that action. And then how valuable is the data? Well, it actually depends on what are your choices, what scenarios are you choosing between. So I think I'm very interested in the possibility for flood monitoring to certainly save lives and maybe do other things. But the big question I would have is, what can you actually do? What are the scenarios that be different? One possibility is just ban construction in that area. I don't feel qualified to know the costs and risks of that, but I think that there's a wide view that data alone is a solution, and I think that data only allows you to make smarter decisions. By itself, it's not enough.
Okay, anything else to share on this scenario or adaptation area before we move on?
I just wanted to respond because here's the opportunity, right? If you look at banking and finance and you measure that with, if you have a certain way to build that reduces your risk, which reduces insurance, which makes it eminently more fundable, that is the opportunity that in the political arena, in the design arena, in the community advisement arena, that is the key. So we should be talking about this as opportunity rather than, oh, woe is me, it's flooding. Oh, wait, let's, as you said, take the measure. Let's now move forward. What is the goal and opportunity that we can do? Investment, change of living patterns. There are chronic issues that exist now. In that change of living patterns, we can actually improve the community. That's what I'm interested in.
Andreas, let's just go one step further in that, because I know you have some thoughts on how many tools we see in the tech space, usually that are trying to solve one particular problem, and maybe there's 100 tools for the same problem with some slight nuances. You need one tool that does for example, the risk mapping of flood areas. Then you need another tool that's looking at the insurance part. How do they talk to each other to make sure that the insights are then getting to the right person, or how should they talk about it? I know you have very strong thoughts on this.
Oh God.
Okay, and also we're not here all day, so
I have been ranting about this for the past week or something, and Victoria has been at the receiving end of many of these rants. One of the problems is really sort of how siloed our data is. So we have a very thin veneer of digitalization over a vast trove of information that sits in different folders. It's saved in arbitrary sort of structures, not accessible. Every time sort of someone comes on the scene and says, hey, I want to build something new, I want to roll out data, I want to provide data, they start with a new format, they have a new structure, they sort of like convince then 2 or 3 local governments or companies to adopt this, but it's not scalable because then sort of the implementation effort is so vast. So what we actually need is we need sort of a digital twin of the world that feeds data in a standardized way or has data in a standardized way that is accessible for everyone, because otherwise we are not getting to this one. And then we are coming to sort of AI, which has also been the big topic this week. AI feeds on data, and if the data is not available, if the data is stored in sort of a weird format or sort of not stored in a consistent way, we cannot use or leverage AI to the extent that we could theoretically use it. AI basically is not intelligent, but and it relies on data being there and data being consistent and data being accessible. So, and that's, I think that's sort of my biggest bugbear at the moment, that we are sort of like stuck in a situation where everyone has 10 different spreadsheets with the name sort of like calculations version 2_final.3 or something. And 20 of these sits on your drive or something, and the AI obviously doesn't know which one to use.
If I might respond, I completely agree. So I am not an expert on adaptation, but in the area of emissions, that's roughly what the Climate Trace Coalition has done. So we're not an organization, we're just many, many organizations that figured out how do we share our data. And so we didn't so much create anything new as just figure out how to talk to each other. And I would agree, it has just transformed our ability to use AI to find solutions, and all we did was share.
There we go. That's all we need to do. Okay, let's move on, shall we, to scenario 2, please. Okay, we're going to talk about on the mitigation side of things now. You'll be pleased to know. One more, please. So now we are going to imagine an elderly person living in Athens or maybe Madrid or one of the countries or cities that are experiencing dangerously high levels of temperature in the summer on an increasingly on an increasing basis. The heat waves are no longer short and might happen once a summer. They come in waves and they're absolutely relentless. Indoor temperatures can reach more than 40 degrees C, and they just can't cool their homes affordably. They simply weren't built for that. This is one of the fastest growing climate risks, and it's deeply inequitable, and we need to be finding affordable ways to be retrofitting buildings to make sure that they are able to cope with some of these dangerously high temperatures. By 2030, 2.2 billion people will face dangerous indoor heat, and heat already causes 5 million premature deaths per year. Overheating in poorly insulated homes reduces productivity by up to 20%, and that's something we can maybe touch on, how solving one problem has caused another. So again, low-tech and high-tech solutions. We've got proven solutions all over the place, but the secret to getting to critical mass and being able to improve as many buildings as possible is deployment of solutions and people simply knowing what exists out there that's possible to use. So I'm hoping this video works. Can we please try this one? Okay, excellent. This is actually a Kompas portfolio company called EcoWorks, based in Berlin. Andreas, you made the investment, if you want to say anything about them.
Yeah, so EcoWorks is serial offsite energy renovation at scale. They industrialize a process that usually was very labor intensive and very invasive for the inhabitants of these buildings. So they do a 3D LiDAR scan, because for these buildings, mostly from the 60s, you do not have floor plans available anymore, and anyway, sort of buildings change over time. So they scan it, create sort of a digital model of this, go to a factory, take advantage of sort of the lack or sort of the low construction at the moment in Germany, so it's fairly cheap. Get a completely new facade, install it without any scaffolding, so just with mobile cranes within a couple of weeks, and then you move from a G energy performance building to a net zero energy performance building. They can also upgrade sort of all the lines, so they have patented a way to run sort of heating, fiber and everything else through the facade into the building, and then the installation of the windows is basically just a 30-minute task with each window where they go in. The window is already pre-installed, they just put in a sachet and then it's done.
Okay, so let's talk then about, actually, maybe another slide? Yeah, sorry, one more slide and then one more, next slide, please. Yes, here we go. Couple of other solutions. Here is some external shading that's been installed here. The Good Homes Alliance in the UK published a report a few years ago that included a tool that was Excel based, but by design, because they want it to be super accessible to homeowners who, maybe have just gone through a heat wave themselves and they're like, what on earth can I do to improve my home? And so it takes you through kind of step by step, what risk is your home based on the building type, what are the options that are available to you to mitigate your overheating before you're tempted to install an air conditioning unit. And then there's some other systems. Runwise here is another technology platform that will actually monitor in commercial buildings. Because of course, if you're an office worker with lots of people in a building, and during the day when the heat wave is at its peak, then commercial buildings also affected here. So this is a tool specifically for commercial buildings to help them with both overheating and if you need to fix efficiencies of your boilers, for example, as well. And again, enabling access to the information and just to make decisions on what's possible. Tint here is another one of our investments from Kompas. It's a dynamic glazing company that can take your windows from completely clear to completely opaque, and so you can adjust the level of opacity, and that improves energy efficiency, of course, but also detracts or reflects the glare so that you're reducing the amount of overheating inside the spaces as well. So again, from Excel to dynamic glazing, low tech and high tech, lots of examples of ways that people can do it. It's just a case of providing access to those solutions. Any thoughts on what we've seen so far?
Sure, yeah. I'm going to give you some examples that the local governments have implemented that leverage civil society to take action, because I think that's really important at scale. So in New York City and New Jersey, first in New York City, the Green Streets program, so outside the building and how do you contribute that, and if you are a building owner, your street front is then given incentives to either plant or regreen the street, as well as handle floodwaters from torrential downpours and rain. New Jersey has done this so well. In Hoboken, they implemented this after Hurricane Sandy, and years later, Tropical Storm Ophelia came through, and that entire area of the city handled almost 2 million gallons of water from the storm, and the town was shut down for a single day versus Hurricane Sandy when it was shut down for 90 days minimum. But the thing is, with this program, they've cooled the ambient environment temperature between 4 and 6 degrees C because of the Green Streets program. Now, the other incentive for the individual building is a white roof, blue roof, and green roof programs. Those have all been implemented in New York City. The white roof program trains youth for summer jobs to go ahead and paint flat roofs white to increase the albedo for reflecting the heat. So the building itself is a very low-cost, low-tech first step, not the last step, but the first step. It also gives youth some cash in their pocket, right? It starts that process. Blue roof program combined with the white roof program harvests rainwater to detention tanks. The detention tanks then can be used for watering gardens, what have you, or hold on to the water and release it after the storm. Millions upon millions of square meters of flat roofs exist in New York City, and this is all incentivized and paid for in part by the city government. And then, of course, the green roof program, and that's also incentivized. That has proven, just as in New Jersey, to cool the ambient temperature of the neighborhood 4 to 6 degrees C. On buildings that are built well over 100 to 150 years old, these are vernacular buildings. And before electricity, these buildings have natural adaptation and alignment with the urban environment or with the environment. So I think the point is that there's got to be a way to leverage civil society on very easy solutions, but also we cannot forget the past that predated electricity, that predated that cooling systems, and rely on some of that vernacular to inform our decisions in the future.
I love solutions that have multiple benefits. That super helps with the return on investment as well, and also the community-based scheme. How much in degrees does urban heat island effect contribute to cities? Like, how big a problem is that?
Say it again.
How big a challenge is the urban heat island effect? How much does that in general contribute to the feeling in a city?
No, it's enormous. So yeah, it depends on which city you're in the U.S., but it is the number one killer, as you said. It's also become, for adaptation plans, it's the number one issue that cities face. And getting at it is not just the Green Streets program and giving people opportunity to make their envelope more efficient. When they're doing that, they have to actually look at how the city is budgeting for maintenance of those new green areas, and that's been the sort of issue. Cities look at it as, this is going to be a maintenance nightmare for our parks department, our transportation and network departments, things like that. But what they're also finding is that there's these co-benefits start to reduce the amount of electricity being used. It's reducing a lot of the cooling effect and putting money in the pockets of people with fixed income. So that is still being worked out, but it's an enormous, enormous burden on cities currently.
There's also, I don't have the statistic in my head, maybe it's in my notes, I can't remember, but productivity is super affected as well by being in buildings when you're overheating. As we probably have all experienced this week, your brain just simply doesn't work in the same way. 38%? Wow. What do you think?
Number one, I'm a huge fan of green roofs because they have an effect on the surroundings, but they also are a massive improvement for sort of the climate in the house overall. Maybe sort of an anecdote. So I used to live in Vienna for some time because I ran an energy VC there. And while Vienna does a lot of things right, what they have done really wrong is that they have very little trees. So they have a lot of concrete, they have a lot of asphalt, and they had to start, and Vienna is not that far south in Europe, but they had to start in the summers to basically set up designated cooling zones for people to go to. So air-conditioned rooms, or then also sort of on public streets, they are just spraying water continuously in order to cool down the city. And this is sort of, maybe when we are talking about COP and biodiversity and everything else, that is actually sort of a free service that the environment provides to us when we have trees. They cool down, and whenever you in the summer go into a park, you notice sort of how it's measurably cooler.
Maybe I'd say two things. I think, first of all these solutions are fantastic. I'm a particular fan of the spreadsheet that allows you to compare the costs and benefits. So often I find that there's one solution that it's all benefits. It's cheaper upfront and cheaper in the long run, and benefits on various dimensions. So I'm always fan of looking at the data. Maybe I think the thing I can add from a slightly different perspective is we are accustomed to the old paradigm that using more energy is a problem. And I think the projections in this scenario, if we're about 5 years out in Europe in this, by then the projections are about a third of the time electricity will have no carbon footprint at all. And we are seeing a rise. Parts of Australia just moved to literally free electricity at times when there's surplus solar. We see over and over again in models that this is coming. And so I would think that if you are avoiding heat, it's highly likely those will be the sunny hours. And so a different paradigm would be to say, what does it look like to design buildings when in certain hours of the day we have unlimited free clean energy, but in other hours of the day it actually costs money and time and resources to get energy? I think that increasing thermal mass, increasing insulation, and thinking about smart controls that can use the energy at one time and then coast at other times is one solution we haven't mentioned here. That one's a little higher tech, but also useful.
That is actually sort of one thing, and that is something that people can do. So Germany now is a land of renters. So 50% of people rent. Most people don't own their homes, and they have been sort of excluded from sort of the move to green energy because they obviously can't put a solar plant on sort of their roof. I live on the top floor of an apartment building. I rent, and it gets hot in the summer, and we now, beginning of this year, we introduced legislation that allowed everyone to put sort of a small solar panel on their balcony. You can do 800 watts there. You can do storage. They are now super cheap. It's like 500 or 600 euros for an installation, and you can run your air conditioning off it, because sort of when your solar plant runs at maximum capacity, you can just consume it. Benefit is everything else that you consume is getting back into the grid for free. So we also help to sort of like produce more energy, and it incentivizes a lot of people to do that.
And in the meantime, when everyone's using their air conditioning units, it's not causing extra burden on the grid. So it's win-win, win-win. Okay. Are we done with overheating? Should we move on to the last one? Okay, excellent, because I think the video is not going to work. So, okay, health, here we go. So the third scenario, please, is now we're in a classroom in Delhi. Thank you. Or Lagos, or Sao Paulo. Imagine 45 students, windows that can barely open. It's 35 degrees outside, and we're about 2.5 parts per million in terms of levels, far beyond safe limits. I actually met a 10-year-old girl here at COP this week who that is her reality in those sorts of those sorts of classrooms. And when she says we could go outside, but there's no shading outside, so we'll get too hot. So it's just, yeah, absolutely crazy scenario that they're in. Children breathe more air per kilogram of body weight than adults, and so therefore this is an enormous health emergency. 90% of children breathe unhealthy air, as I mentioned earlier, and air pollution causes 1 in 10 deaths among children under 5. Studies also show, similar to what we've just said with overheating, that poor ventilation can cut learning performance by up to 30%. And so again, we're looking here desperately for solutions that are affordable, immediately deployable, scalable across low resource settings, and there are solutions that are tech-enabled when that enables real value. Again, I think we're there looking at a combination of different solutions to create those optimal environments. So I have a few examples. I think one of them is a video, so we won't be able to see it, but let's have a look. Yeah, this is a system for, again, outside of the buildings itself, but it's a sensor system that has been deployed in lots of cities. I think it's 50 countries around the world. And that helps you know what the air pollution levels are outside so that you can adjust the systems inside the building as well. And then the systems in the building are responsive to what's happening outside. And you don't have systems inside the building that are operating on the same level all through the day. Let's go to the next one. Fortunately, we can't see that video. Okay, again, a couple of other solutions, high-tech, low-tech to start with at the top. This is RENA. It's actually a filter system that can be installed onto fans, ceiling fans within classroom spaces. It's where they're most being deployed at the moment. Yeah, right? And can cut down that level of parts per million that I mentioned in half in 35 minutes. So it's extremely effective, very low cost, very deployable, and hopefully we'll see it in many, many more schools very, very quickly. And then obviously the higher tech solutions where you have very responsive systems inside spaces that respond in real time to the particle levels within the buildings and can adjust the HVAC systems, either integrated or retrofitted into HVAC systems, and then even apps that can be telling you in a real time what the air quality is in the space that you're in. And I've seen case studies of schools where they have competitions amongst the classrooms and amongst different schools, and it's actually fed into funding strategies as well. So it can be extremely effective, especially when there's the studies that show the direct link to learning environments, which is what they're there for.
I'm a huge fan of this because number one, you can only improve what you can measure or what you measure, and this is, I think, one of the benefits of Corona, that everyone sort of suddenly was focused on air quality and on ventilation and everything else, and we had, at least in the West, we had sort of a big push for having more sensors. And having sensors available makes us more aware of the air quality around us, because as humans we adapt to what we're in. So the longer you sit in a stuffy room, sort of you gradually, you don't notice the change, and at one point it becomes unbearable, you get a headache, and then you think, okay, yeah, now it's sort of time to open a window. But if you have a CO2 sensor, and I have one on my desk, sort of you can see actually that sort of the levels where your performance dips are sort of way below where you actually notice it. The problem that I have with sensors is that all of these sensors require maintenance, they require sort of batteries and everything else, and this is in a resource-constrained environment always difficult. So combining them, for example, with solar cells. So there's a company out of Germany, anything, that does a completely connected CO2 and air quality sensor that for 10 years doesn't need any maintenance, because they basically have developed sort of a high-powered small solar cell that sits on top of the sensor, powers it, and then can actually to a central server send every couple of minutes a signal on what the air quality is and inform people. And those are the things we cannot sort of just ship tens of thousands of sensors somewhere and then expect them to be sort of installed correctly, maintained correctly, batteries changed. We create sort of a massive problem. We need to think about long-term solutions that are sustainable.
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I mean, really, so we're talking about air quality, and we're at COP. So the underlying problem is people are burning fossil fuels. It's air pollutant. So we can talk about the solutions for the classroom, install MERV 13 filters, all those things, but as soon as that student goes back home, they're walking in the environment that is completely polluted. So reducing emissions and changing transportation networks is essential. So if we take the school location, if we use a Swiss standard, for example, if you have to walk or bike more than 15 minutes, they build another school. So everybody walks to school. You remove the whole idea of transportation networks that are carbon producing and pollutants in the atmosphere. But now let's go down to what, as an architect and designer, the WELL standard is very important to discuss here. The WELL standard is a design standard by which you look at material choices and the air quality that is the outcome of that, and how you design an interior of a space that is a high performance, very healthy environment space. It is measurable. So taking a look at those. For the AIA, we have a materials pledge that really tracks the material, its manufacturing, making sure that it's of a bio-based material or a material that is kind to the environment all along its supply chain for its delivery, and it has no outgassing or contributions. And some of those materials actually eat the negative things in the atmosphere. So there's a huge movement towards that. But then this whole idea about WELL is bringing into the environment, instead of a sterile environment, is using things like living machines and bringing green into the environment, especially education spaces, has shown that with that air quality going up and having this sort of biophilia type of relationship to the interiors, is that you have a better performance value in the testing and the education and all of those pieces. So there's a lot to say on this. But we do have to look at policy. We do have to look at the idea of location and the insanity of having kids commute 30 or 40 minutes every day to school in carbon producing machinery. So yeah, a lot more to say on it.
Really interesting solutions. I'm a particular fan of the filtration system, particularly if we powered with these sort of long-term methods. The one I would say on ventilation is that, to your point, this is all being caused by the climate crisis. Ventilation is not as helpful a solution, I would think, when you're at 1,000 parts per million outdoors, which is going to be the case for a lot of these schools for a lot of the same seasons. And so maybe even in the building session, I'll mention some ways to reduce fossil fuels that aren't in buildings. So I would say 3 things we can really do. We know that much of the air quality problem in India is driven by crop burning. Buenos Aires, Argentina has demonstrated it's very possible to reduce crop burning through very simple, straightforward measures. We know that there are very specific reasons this is happening in India, that are regulations related to water quality that could be revised. Another solution is electric vehicles. Don't need to explain that, but India is doing a remarkably good job on deploying electric vehicles. And then a third option would be renewable energy, where one of the big things I'll mention is right now there's a very live debate. If you build a wind farm or a solar panel in India, you cause roughly 200 times the health benefits than if you build that same wind farm or solar panel in the United States. And so there are a big push because the power plants in the United States have much less pollution per unit of electricity, and there's many fewer people who breathe it in because of population density differences. So there's a big push for American companies to build renewable energy not close to home, but instead in India. And the interesting thing is that they were not asking to be compensated, they're asking for a regulatory change to just allow the construction of renewable energy in another location. I think this is a really interesting of a win-win solution.
But I have to, automotive industry originally. So electric cars are great, but they are not the solution. The solution is city planning. So as you have said, having sort of the schools where you need them, having a 15-minute city, looking at Paris and the improvements that are being done there. Because the emissions, we are focusing now on emissions from carbon or from burning fuel with cars, but there's much more. There's tires, there's brake, and so on, and these are the PM 2.5 that sort of like are dangerous. So I agree, it's a step in the right decision, and it's probably sort of a stopgap measure, because infrastructure and city planning always takes longer and takes decades, but the ultimate goal should be that people actually shouldn't have to drive to get somewhere.
It's a good point.
All right, well, I think we're coming to the end of the session. I was going to ask you about policy asks, but you've all covered that already. So unless you have anything else, feel free to add, but we've already got a long list to take to our policymakers. So I think I'll just wrap up by saying that resilient buildings and by extension cities need to be addressing climate action, but they need to be enabling health protection and human dignity at the same time. And to your point, Gavin, they are part of a broader ecosystem within cities, and everything is interconnected, and therefore so should the solutions be. So we have the solutions, we have brilliant innovators. Now what we need is the scale, equity, and political will, and I think I'll leave us on the note that you made right at the very beginning, Illya, which is about this idea of ethical charge. And I think not just architects, right? Any stakeholder in anyone's daily lives, frankly, and the work that you do, consider that ethical charge and make sure that you're using it to good effect. Okay? Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of COP.